In a previous episode of CodeDependent, we saw how to change the button skin and get different behavior that gave less or more indication about the button state. So you move the mouse over the button, you should give some indication that the mouse has actually moved over the button so that you know when the button clicks that some action will occur, right? Just giving good visual feedback to the user of what's going on. So I wanted to see what we needed to do to the standard button skin to actually enable animated behavior instead. So by default, the buttons in Flex are exactly like this. This is just a standard button. If we take a look at the code here, the third button here does not provide a different skin, which means it's just going to use the standard skin for button. And it's going to give indication of being over, and it's going to give indication of being down in addition to this silly animated click label. So that's all very nice, but what if we actually wanted animated behavior? What if we didn't want the button to automatically flip to the over state immediately and then flip to the up state and flip to the click state and all that stuff? Right, so what could we do to actually animate the skin? So we created this button down here that actually has animated behavior instead. So you can see as I hover over this thing, as I move onto it, we get a gradual hover effect where it will change to the hover state, but it'll do so over time. So how did we actually make that work? Well, the first step was to declare the button with a non-standard skin. So we said, OK, use this skin as the skin for our button that we're declaring here. Everything else is exactly as it is for the other buttons, but we're using a different button skin. And the skin I defined by taking the standard button skin, and this is a good tip for you in general, is if you want a custom skin, well, we've put a fair amount of work into the standard Flex components to define some nice skins. Maybe that's a good place for you to start from. Go ahead and grab one of the standard button skins. In this case, I grabbed button skin.mxml. And you can take a look at what we've defined, and you can copy and paste code and maybe start from there and then build in your own custom graphics and behaviors. So I started from the standard button skin, and then I changed it to have animations in it. And it turned out to be really easy. Now, I could do a diff here, which would be interesting, but not very. So instead, I'll just tell you the only differences between my animated skin that gives this behavior and the standard skin, which gives this sort of toggle on-off behavior, is this transition section here and a bunch of IDs. So the transition section says, OK, when we go to the over state from whatever other state it's in, we're going to run a parallel effect that's going to run its child effects in parallel. So it's going to run an animated color effect on the following objects in here. So it's basically going to animate the color automatically on this shadow G1 and the shadow G2 and the fill G1, all of these elements that are defined down below. And it's going to run a fade on the following targets here. So what I did to figure out what to do here is I looked at all the property changes in this file for the skin. So as the skin changes the button look from the up to the over state, say, for instance, then maybe something has a color defined that's specific to the over state, a color.over. So for instance, if we look for shadow G1, we can see that that object has a color defined of being black here, but when it's in the down state, it's defined as being white. And it has an alpha state of that. If it's in the down state, it has an alpha of 0. So we have all these color and alpha changes on these objects, and those are the only per state changes in the entire skin. So I just defined two effects. There's an animate color that will automatically change the color, and there's a fade that will automatically change the fade on its targets. And I defined these animations for all three of the transitions I defined. And so I said, when we go to the over state, animate colors, animate alpha. When we go to the up state, animate colors, animate alpha. And when we go to the disabled state, animate colors and animate alpha. And I don't actually care whether those objects and those properties are changing in that particular state transition, because if they aren't, they'll simply be left the way they are, which is a change in Flex 4, actually. Flex 3, they would automatically run a fade in, even if the value didn't change. But in Flex 4, we said, no, if it's that value in this state and it's the same value in the next state, just leave it as it is. So just to make the effects easier to define, I basically define the exact same effects on all the same target objects. And they're going to run in all of these three state transitions. Now, you'll notice that I actually didn't define an animation for the click state. So when you click, it automatically clicks. Right? It's going to happen immediately. There is no transition. There's no animation happening. And I think this is an important nuance that When you're doing something like hovering over, I think it's actually reasonable and kind of a nice effect to show, oh, you're moving over the object, right? This is a transitional thing as you change from this state to that state, right? So I think it's okay to give an indication, oh, you are moving into this state of being over the button, right? So having an animation with some small duration I think is appropriate. However, when you click, that's really an atomic operation. I am clicking. I'm telling you to do something right now, and I don't want any delay introduced by running an animation. So I think it's appropriate to have maybe a very tiny animation. We're talking like 50 or 100 milliseconds, but also just having an automatic immediate interaction instead is totally fine. In this case, I thought, you know what, just click the darn button. Don't introduce a time delay by actually animating the thing. So we've defined our transition section here. That defines the actual animations that are happening. And notice that it defines it without actually saying, OK, I want you to change the shadow color from this to that, and I want you to change alpha from that to this. Instead, it just picks up those values automatically from the states, which is the way that flex transitions work in general. And the only other thing I defined in the file were the IDs for the object. So for instance, I gave this object here this gradient entry. It didn't have an ID before. Well, I needed to actually animate it, or animate the properties in it. So I gave it an ID and said, OK, we'll call this shadow G1, and then we can automatically target it with our various animate color effects up above. So if you want to see the code for this application that animates button skin properties, check out my blog at graphics-geek.blogspot.com.